You will always be a pathetic freak, Molly, a disgusting, selfish, ungrateful bitch. Crack a sharp, dry sound tore through the soft melody of the string quartet. The crowd froze. My head spun, my jaw feeling like it had just shattered under the brutal weight of my sister-in-law's fist. Fresh blood seeped from the corner of my mouth, tasting salty, staining the delicate white lace of my wedding dress. She stood there, chest heaving, her eyes burning with the smug satisfaction of someone who was used to walking all over me. That was the moment Jack, my husband, an FA-18 fighter pilot major, stepped up. He didn't yell. He looked dead into her eyes, whispering in a tone as cold as steel. You just assaulted a commanding officer. Everything you have is over. Wise. But before I tell you how my husband used a single military law to crush that piece of trash's career without throwing a single punch, hit like and subscribe. Let me know in the comments where you are watching from and what time it is right now. What happened next is something my family never saw coming. I stumbled backward. My white heels sank an inch into the manicured California turf. A sharp ringing echoed in my left ear, drowning out the ocean breeze. Panic, raw and civilian, tried to claw its way up my throat. I shut it down. 28 years old. Marine Corps Intelligence Captain. You do not cry when you take a hit. You assess the threat. I didn't raise a shaking hand to cover my face. I didn't gasp. I straightened my spine, locked my knees, and squared my shoulders. I leveled a dead, hollow stare at my attacker. Brenda, my brother's wife. She had both hands planted firmly on her wide hips, her heavy chin jutted out in defiance. She was a staff sergeant, an E7. But right now, standing on that grass, she was just a local bully waiting for her victim to shatter. She wanted a meltdown. She wanted a crying, hysterical bride to validate her pathetic power trip. She needed to prove she was the apex predator of our family. I refused to hand her that victory. I swallowed the thick metallic blood pooling on my tongue. I locked the vault in my head. The silence on the lawn was absolute. The cellist had stopped mid-bow. In that suffocating heavy quiet, the fragile part of me broke protocol. Just for a split second. I looked for my mother. I just wanted a shield. I wanted my mom to act like a mom. She stepped out from the crowd of frozen guests. My chest tightened with a pathetic surge of hope. But she didn't rush toward me. She didn't look at my bleeding mouth. She glided right past me like I was a piece of cheap patio furniture. The scent of her vanilla perfume drifted by, sickeningly sweet. She grabbed Brenda's thick shoulders, her voice dropping into a hushed, anxious whisper. Oh my God, Brenda, what are you doing? People are staring. Just calm down, honey. Don't make a scene. The physical slap was nothing. That dismissal. That was a serrated blade twisting directly into my gut. On a combat deployment, if I got a paper cut, a Navy corpsman was there in seconds. Here I was bleeding on my own wedding day, and my mother was doing damage control for the woman who hit me. My pain wasn't a tragedy to her. It was a PR liability. She didn't care about my fractured jaw. She only cared about saving face in front of the caterers. I shifted my gaze to the right. My father stood near the rented floral archway. He had his thick arms crossed tightly over his chest, his cheap suit pulling at the seams. His lips were pressed into a thin white line. He glared at me, not at Brenda, at me. His eyes screamed a silent accusation, as if my bruised cheek was a massive inconvenience ruining his access to the open bar. He always hated that I made rank. He hated that a woman wore officer bars while his precious son was a civilian failure. Next to him stood my older brother, Ryan. Ryan hid behind his aggressive wife like a coward. He let out a low, breathy scoff. A tiny, arrogant smirk crept onto his face. He offered Brenda a slow, approving nod. They formed a toxic brick wall right there on the grass. In this family, my existence was only tolerated if I kept my mouth shut and opened my wallet. I was their personal ATM, and ATMs aren't allowed to bleed. A massive shadow detached itself from the edge of my vision. Jack. He didn't run. He didn't lunge like some barroom brawler. He moved with the terrifying, deliberate pacing of a fighter pilot locked onto a target. No wasted motion. He bypassed the gasping crowd. He stopped right in front of me, his broad frame creating a physical wall of navy blue fabric between me and my family. He reached into his suit jacket. He pulled out a crisp white pocket square. Without a single word, he pressed it gently to the corner of my mouth. His gray eyes met mine. There was no pity in them, just absolute lethal understanding. He didn't look at my parents. He didn't acknowledge Ryan's smirk. Jack just turned his head a fraction of an inch, catching Brenda in his peripheral vision. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "We are done playing your games," he murmured. The bass of his voice vibrated in the dead air, a promise of absolute destruction. Brenda's smug face faltered. Her jaw ticked. But the damage was already done. The curtain was pulled back. I tasted the salt again. The heavy, dark copper resting on my tongue. The stinging heat radiating across my cheek. It wasn't just today. That exact same metallic taste. That exact same look of pure, unadulterated envy in Brenda's eyes. The sensation grabbed me by the throat and pulled me violently backward. 10 years backward. Straight into a dining room reeking of stale beer, burnt turkey fat, and shattered dreams. 10 years ago, the dining room smelled heavily of greasy roasted turkey, cheap canned gravy, and stale beer. The television in the living room was cranked up to a deafening volume, the frantic shouting of NFL announcers echoing off the cheap linoleum floor. It was my brother's first Thanksgiving as a married man. His new wife Brenda sat at the head of the table like a queen holding court. Back then she was just a corporal, an E4 in the Marine Corps. To my parents, though, she was a 5-star general. They hung on her every word. They passed her the best cuts of meat. Ryan sat next to her, chest puffed out, leeching off the military respect he was too lazy to earn himself. I sat at the far corner of the table, a ghost in my own house. I was 18. For 8 grueling months, I had functioned on 3 hours of sleep a night. I dragged myself through AP classes, worked late shifts at a greasy diner, and studied until my eyes blurred. I did it for one reason. I wanted a ticket out. But underneath that, buried deep in my naive teenage chest, I just wanted my parents to look at me the way they looked at Brenda. Just once. Underneath the table, my fingers dug into a thick manila envelope. The paper was slightly damp from the nervous sweat on my palms. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Today, I thought, today they will be proud of me. I pulled the envelope up and placed it gently on the glass tabletop. "I have some news," I said. My voice wavered. My father did not look away from the Dallas Cowboys game. He took a long pull from his Miller Lite and grunted. "Make it fast. It is 3rd down." I pushed the crisp white letter forward. "I got a full NROTC scholarship. I'm going to college. And then, I'm going to be a Marine officer." The words hung in the air, competing with the roar of the television crowd. My mother hummed a completely vacant sound as she scooped more mashed potatoes onto her plate. "That is nice, honey." But Brenda heard it. The heavy metal carving fork in her hand stopped halfway to her mouth. She slowly turned her head. Her eyes locked onto the letter. The temperature in the room plummeted. I saw the exact moment the realization hit her. She was a lowly corporal who scrubbed barracks floors. I was the quiet, invisible little sister-in-law who had just secured a direct path to a gold bar. A commanding officer. It was a direct fatal blow to her massive, fragile ego. Her jaw tightened. Her eyes narrowed into dark, venomous slits. The same look she would give me 10 years later on the grass at my wedding. "An officer," Brenda repeated. The word tasted like poison in her mouth. She did not congratulate me. She did not smile. She reached across the center of the table toward a bowl of stuffing. Her thick forearm brushed deliberately against an open, half-full bottle of cheap Cabernet. It was not a clumsy accident. It was a calculated strike. I watched it happen in agonizing slow motion. The heavy glass bottle tipped. The dark red liquid surged over the rim. It hit the glass table with a wet slap and flooded outward in a rapid, dark wave. It swallowed my letter. I gasped, lunging forward, my chair scraping violently against the floor. But I was too late. The cheap wine soaked instantly into the thick paper. The official seal of the United States Navy blurred. The ink of my acceptance, my blood, my sweat, my ticket out of this hell dissolved into a muddy red smear. Brenda pulled her arm back. She did not reach for a napkin. She did not flinch. She just looked at the ruined paper, then up at me. A slow, sickening smirk crawled across her face. "Oops," she said. Her voice was flat, totally devoid of apology. "My bad." She picked up her fork again. "But hey, desk jockey paper pushers can just print another one, right?" Ryan let out a short, ugly laugh. He actually laughed. My hands hovered over the soaked envelope, trembling violently. Hot, blinding tears pricked the corners of my eyes. I looked desperately at my father. "See this," I begged him silently. "See what she just did." My father finally tore his eyes away from the football game. He looked at the red puddle on the table, then at my shaking hands. He let out a heavy, irritated sigh. "Jesus, Molly," he snapped. "It is just a piece of paper. Do not sit there and make that sour face. You are ruining the mood." He waved his beer bottle at me dismissively. "Clean that mess up before it stains the glass. Let your sister-in-law eat in peace." The room went dead silent to me. The TV announcers faded away. In that exact moment, the 18-year-old girl who desperately wanted her parents' love simply ceased to exist. Something inside my chest cracked, splintered, and froze solid. I did not argue. I did not scream. I did not let a single tear fall. Crying in this house was blood in the water. It only attracted the sharks. I reached out and picked up the dripping, ruined letter. The wet paper tore slightly in my grip. The red wine dripped from the edges onto the linoleum, looking exactly like fresh blood. I stood up, turned my back on them, and walked down the narrow hallway to my bedroom. I closed the door. I sat on the edge of my bed in the dark, holding the soggy remains of my future. I did not try to salvage it. I threw it in the trash can. I realized the brutal truth that night. Nobody was coming to save me. Nobody in this house gave a damn if I lived, died, or succeeded. If I wanted to survive, I had to carve my own heart out and replace it with armor. I would go to their military schools. I would let them break my bones, freeze my skin, and push me to the edge of death. Because no physical pain the Marine Corps could inflict would ever hurt as much as sitting at that dining table. 2 months later, I stepped off a bus into the freezing, knee-deep mud of Quantico, Virginia. And I was ready to become a weapon. The freezing mud of Quantico, Virginia, swallowed my boots whole. It was 0300. Hour 14 of a 20-mile tactical hump through the dense, unforgiving pine woods of the Marine Corps Officer Candidate School. The temperature hovered just above freezing. A relentless driving rain turned the dirt trails into deep, thick soup. My 80-pound rucksack dug into my shoulders, the canvas straps cutting raw, bleeding grooves into my collarbones. I was 5'5", 130 pounds. I was practically drowning in my own gear. All around me, the big guys were breaking. College linebackers and frat house heavyweights who showed up on day one looking like fitness models were now openly sobbing. I heard a guy from Ohio curse God, drop to his knees in the mud, and refuse to get up. Another one vomited violently into the bushes, his massive frame shaking with hypothermia. They were loud, they were messy. They were shattering under the weight of physical misery. I just kept putting one foot in front of the other. Step, drag, breathe. Step, drag, breathe. The physical pain was nothing. Blisters popping inside wet socks. Shoulders screaming under dead weight. That was just biology. It made sense. It had a finish line. It was a joke compared to the absolute suffocating isolation of sitting at my family's Thanksgiving table. The Marine Corps only wanted to break my muscles. My parents had already tried to break my soul. I bit down on my cracked lower lip. I tasted the familiar metallic tang of blood. I repeated the only words that kept me sane, a quote from Teddy Roosevelt I had memorized back in my dark bedroom. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood. Let them quit. I was not going home. I had no home to go back to. We hit the Nightland navigation course an hour later. The rain stopped, leaving a heavy freezing fog in its place, pitch black, zero visibility. My squad consisted of 4 guys and me. They were all alphas, loud, arrogant, and currently panicking. Our point man, a former state wrestling champion, had just slipped down a ravine and smashed his lensatic compass against a rock. The glass shattered. The dial locked up. Panic set in fast. Egos collided in the dark. "You idiot! We are miles off azimuth!" One guy hissed, shoving the wrestler. "Shut up, I was following your pace count, bro." They stood in a tight circle in the freezing mud, arguing in loud, frantic whispers, pointing fingers, deflecting blame. It was a circus. My default instinct flared up. The survival mechanism I had perfected over 18 years living with my family. Shrink. Do not speak. Do not draw fire. Be a ghost. Let the loud, angry people fight it out. I took a half step backward into the shadows of the pines. I stayed dead silent. But instead of looking at my boots, I looked up. The cloud cover was finally breaking. Through a gap in the branches, I spotted the Big Dipper. I followed the edge of the cup straight up to Polaris, the North Star. I closed my eyes. I brought up the topographical map I had memorized in the barracks. I visualized the contour lines, the draw to our west, the ridge to our east. I opened my eyes. I knew exactly where we were. The guys were still arguing on the verge of throwing punches. I did not yell. I did not ask for permission. I walked straight through the middle of their huddle, bumping a guy's shoulder hard enough to make him stumble. I did not look back. I just started walking on a dead reckoning azimuth toward the rally point. For 3 seconds, they just stared at my back. Then, without a single word, they fell into line behind me. We hit the extraction point an hour ahead of the cutoff time. The silence in the squad was deafening. I had not wasted a single breath arguing. I simply crushed their arrogance with competence. The next morning, after 2 hours of rack time, a drill instructor barked my name. I was ordered to the command tent. The tent smelled like wet canvas, damp wool, and burnt coffee. Colonel Davis sat behind a folding metal table. She was a legendary intelligence officer, 2 tours in Fallujah. A jagged pale scar ran along her jawline. Her eyes were flat gray and completely devoid of warmth. She looked like a woman who had seen the worst of humanity and decided it was boring. I snapped to attention, heels locked, spine rigid, eyes locked straight ahead. Colonel Davis picked up the after-action report from the land nav course. She dropped it back onto the metal table. Smack. The air in the tent was heavy. I could hear my own pulse thudding in my ears. "Officer Candidate Cooper." Her voice was a low, gravelly rasp. It commanded the room without trying. "Ma'am, I read the squad leader's report. You lost your compass. The squad broke down. You took the point and navigated by the stars." She leaned forward, resting her forearms on the cold metal. Good execution, terrible leadership. My jaw tightened. I kept my eyes fixed on the tent wall behind her. "You have a very bad habit, Cooper," she said quietly. Her eyes cut right through my armor, straight to the scared 18-year-old girl hiding inside. When there is conflict, your first instinct is to make yourself small. You step back, you go quiet, you try not to be an eyesore. My lungs seized. She was reading my entire life history off my posture. "That is the defense mechanism of a victim," she stated flatly. The word hit me like a physical punch to the gut. Victim. Colonel Davis stood up. She walked around the table and stopped inches from my face. I could smell the stale black coffee on her breath. "Do not bring that pathetic habit into my Marine Corps. We do not need ghosts out there. Ghosts cannot protect their Marines. We need blades." She leaned in, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "Stop hiding behind your own competence. Stop shrinking just to make the loud idiots in the room feel comfortable. From this second on, you stop being a victim. You get sharp. Do you understand me?" "Yes, ma'am." The words tore out of my throat. "Get out of my tent." I did an about-face and marched out into the freezing Virginia morning. The cold air hit my face, but I did not feel it. Something inside me had violently shifted. The heavy, suffocating blanket of my family's conditioning was gone, ripped away by a woman who did not care about my feelings, only my survival. I stopped walking. I looked down at my hands. They were covered in dried mud and scabs. They were not the hands of a punching bag anymore. I rolled my shoulders back. I took a deep breath. I was done shrinking. The next person who tried to step on me was going to bleed. 4 years passed. I wore the double silver bars of a Marine Corps captain. The military had kept its promise. It froze me, broke me down, and forged me into a weapon. I was sitting in a cramped, dark tactical operations center in the middle of the Mojave Desert. 29 palms. The air inside the tent was 95 degrees and smelled like sour sweat, burning diesel-powered generators, and wintergreen chewing tobacco. The noise was constant. Infantry commanders barking over radio static, artillery officers screaming for fire missions. It was a room full of aggressive alpha males desperate to prove who had the loudest voice. I sat in the far back corner, silent. I kept my spine rigid, my eyes locked on a glowing thermal satellite feed. As an intelligence officer, the combat units usually treated me like a glorified desk clerk. They wanted to drop bombs. I wanted to read the terrain. They were about to call in an airstrike on a cluster of heat signatures in a rocky valley. They were loud. They were confident. They were walking straight into an ambush. I reached for my radio handset to call a hard stop. Before my finger hit the transmit button, a massive shadow blocked the harsh overhead fluorescent light. Major Jack Monroe, FA-18 fighter pilot. He did not stomp into the tent. He did not yell to announce his presence. He moved with the quiet, lethal grace of a predator. He wore a fire-resistant flight suit that smelled faintly of jet fuel and dry desert dust. He bypassed the screaming infantry colonels and walked straight to my isolated terminal. He leaned over my shoulder. He did not invade my space. He just stared at the thermal map. His long index finger tapped the screen right on the ridgeline behind the primary target area. "It is a trap," he said. His voice was a low, steady rumble that cut perfectly through the chaotic noise of the tent. "Those heat blooms in the valley are decoys. The main hostile force is dug in behind that ridge, hiding under thermal netting, waiting for the infantry to push up." He stood up and looked down at me. "Am I right, Captain?" I froze. I looked up into his gray eyes. I braced myself for the usual condescension. I waited for the sneer, the dismissive wave, the demand that I step aside and let a man handle the real work. That was all I knew. That was my father. That was my brother. But Jack was not looking at me like a nuisance. He was not looking at me like a walking ATM machine. He looked at me with absolute professional respect. He saw my brain. He saw the exact same tactical reality I did, and he validated it without hesitation. A hairline fracture cracked straight down the middle of the steel vault in my chest. For 20 years, I had bled myself dry, begging for that exact look of approval from my own flesh and blood. I had studied until my eyes bled. I had marched through freezing mud. My family gave me nothing but mockery and a wine-soaked letter. Now a stranger in a desert tent was handing me that respect, for free. "You are correct, Major," I said. My voice was steady, but my heart hammered against my ribs. "I am calling the abort now." He gave a single sharp nod. "Good catch, Captain." Then he walked away. He did not steal the credit. He did not run to the commander to boast. He just backed my play and let me do my job. At 0200, the temperature in the Mojave dropped to near freezing. The wind whipped coarse sand against the thick canvas walls of the command tent. I was sitting outside on a rusted metal folding chair, staring out into the pitch-black desert. I was running entirely on adrenaline and fumes. Gravel crunched. Jack walked out of the darkness. He did not ask if he could sit. He pulled up a milk crate and sat beside me. He held 2 battered styrofoam cups. He set one down on the metal chair frame next to my boot. Black coffee, boiling hot, bitter as battery acid. "Drink it," he said. "You look like a corpse." I picked up the cup. The heat seeped through the cheap foam, warming my numb, calloused fingers. I took a sip. It burned the roof of my mouth. It was perfect. "They are loud in there," Jack said, looking out at the dark horizon. He did not look at me. He just spoke to the open air. "But you have the clearest vision in that entire unit, Molly. Do not ever let their noise drown out your signal." I stared at the black liquid in my cup. A hot, tight knot formed in the back of my throat. I swallowed it down hard. I was a Marine. I did not cry. But in that freezing desert night, the bitter coffee tasted like salvation. Jack became my oxygen. He broke through my armor, not with force, but with relentless, quiet consistency. He became my partner, my equal, and eventually my shelter. 2 years later, he asked me to marry him. I said yes. We built a life together. a quiet, disciplined, peaceful life in a small duplex near San Diego. For a brief moment, I actually believed I'd escaped the poison of my past. I thought the steel doors of my new life were locked tight. I was dead wrong. It was a Saturday afternoon. Jack was grilling steaks on the back patio. The sun was shining. The ocean breeze blew through the open windows. Then, the peace shattered. A deafening roar ripped through the quiet neighborhood. A massive brand-new Ford F-250 pickup truck slammed over the curb and jerked into park right on our front lawn. The heavy, oversized tires crushed my flower bed. The doors flew open. Loud, obnoxious laughter spilled out into the street. The heavy scent of cheap beer and burning engine oil flooded through my open window. I walked to the front door. I looked through the peephole. My stomach violently plummeted to the floor. My father, my brother, and Brenda. They were marching up my driveway, and they were not here to celebrate my upcoming wedding. They were here to collect. The roar of a diesel engine shattered the quiet Saturday afternoon. I stood by the front window of our San Diego duplex, my stomach twisting into a cold, hard knot. A massive lifted Ford F-250 Super Duty bounced over the curb. The heavy, aggressive tires crushed the small border of marigolds I had planted last month. The engine cut off, leaving a thick cloud of exhaust hanging over our driveway. The heavy doors swung open. Loud, grating laughter spilled out into the street. Brenda dropped down from the passenger side, her boots hitting the concrete. She slapped the side of the truck bed, her voice dialed up loud enough for the entire neighborhood to hear. She bragged about the custom leather interior and the heavy towing package. She wanted everyone to know she had money. Or at least she wanted everyone to think she did. My parents climbed out of the back. My father was already holding a crushed beer can. They did not drive 400 miles to congratulate me on my upcoming wedding. My internal threat radar was screaming. An hour later, the backyard smelled of charred meat, lighter fluid, and sour domestic beer. The ocean breeze was completely choked out by the heavy, oppressive presence of my family. I sat rigidly on the edge of a patio chair. I watched them operate. My father stood next to the grill. He had cornered Jack. My father tipped his head back, draining his third Busch Light, and crushed the aluminum can in his fist. He tossed it onto the grass, missing the trash bin entirely. He stepped into Jack's personal space and slapped a heavy, calloused hand onto Jack's shoulder. It was a deliberate, aggressive invasion of space. "So, Jack," my father said, his voice dripping with condescension, "you fly those jets. Must be nice sitting up there in the air conditioning all day, pressing buttons. Not exactly breaking your back in the mud like my daughter-in-law Brenda does. Real military work requires sweat, right?" He used physical labor as a weapon to invalidate intelligence. It was his favorite trick. Jack did not step back. He did not break eye contact. He casually flipped a steak on the grill. His face was a mask of absolute calm. "The cooling system is strictly necessary, sir," Jack replied. His voice was low, flat, and completely devoid of intimidation. "It keeps the head perfectly clear when you have to make life or death decisions at Mach 2. But you are absolutely right. Every job in the supply chain is necessary." My father's jaw ticked. The insult flew completely over his head, but he could feel the absolute dominance in Jack's tone. He muttered something under his breath and walked away to grab another beer. By late afternoon, the fake smiles began to crack. The performance was ending. The real objective was about to be executed. I was in the kitchen gathering empty plates. The sliding glass door suddenly scraped along its metal track. Brenda stepped inside. She pulled the door shut behind her with a sharp, heavy thud. The lock clicked. The loud chatter from the backyard was instantly muted. The air in the small kitchen turned thick and suffocating. Brenda turned to face me. The loud, obnoxious sister-in-law was gone. Her eyes narrowed into dark, calculating slits. She looked exactly like a loan shark cornering a desperate debtor in a back alley. She crossed her thick arms over her chest. "Listen to me, Molly," Brenda growled. Her voice dropped the fake sweetness. "Ryan and I bought that new truck out front. The financing rate is killing us. We are underwater on the note this month. They are threatening to repossess it." I did not blink. I stood perfectly still, holding a stack of dirty ceramic plates. I let her talk. I needed to hear her say it out loud. You wear Captain bars now. She continued, her eyes scanning the simple kitchen appliances, assessing my worth. You deploy all the time. You have no kids. You must have a massive pile of hazard pay and combat stipends sitting around doing nothing. We need $20,000. Transfer it by Monday. Family takes care of family, right? The silence in the room was absolute. I stared at her wide, entitled face. Every last pathetic illusion I had about my blood relatives turned to ash and blew away. They did not drive down the California coast to celebrate my happiness. They came to audit me. They came to look at my duplex, look at my future husband, and calculate exactly how much cash they could extract from my life. I had sacrificed my 20s. I had bled in the mud. I had survived the Mojave Desert. And to them, I was nothing but a limitless bank account. I had no human rights in their eyes. I was just a wallet that was currently closed. If you have ever been bled dry by people who call themselves your blood only to be cursed out the second you stop handing over your hard-earned money, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. I want you to drop a comment below and tell me what was the final straw that made you realize your family was only using you. Share your story because no one should have to carry that toxic weight in silence. The refrigerator motor hummed in the background. My hands were perfectly steady. I looked at Brenda. I looked at the woman who had ruined my college acceptance letter 10 years ago. I looked at the woman who thought she could walk into my sanctuary and demand the money I earned with my blood. She tilted her head, waiting for me to pull out my checkbook and surrender. She waited for the frightened 18-year-old girl to submit. I set the stack of plates down on the granite counter. Did you really drive all the way to San Diego? I asked, my voice dropping to a dead hollow whisper, just to ask me to fund your pathetic lifestyle. Brenda's smug expression faltered for a fraction of a second. She took a step forward, invading my space, her chest puffed out in a direct physical threat. I am not asking, Molly, she sneered. She took another step forward, closing the distance between us. She was trying to use her physical size to intimidate me. It was the same playground bullying tactic she used on junior Marines. She expected me to fold. She expected the quiet, invisible little girl from the Thanksgiving table to look down at her shoes and apologize. She did not realize the girl from that table died in the Virginia mud a long time ago. 28 years of suppressed anger, constant belittlement, and financial extortion did not boil over. It froze. The heat in my chest vanished, replaced by a block of absolute, flawless ice. I did not shake. My breathing did not hitch. I slipped effortlessly into my command presence. I locked my knees. I squared my shoulders, instantly erasing the 2-inch height difference between us. I looked dead into her dark, entitled eyes. No. The words snapped off my tongue, a single sharp syllable. It sounded exactly like a live round chambering in a rifle. Brenda froze. Her eyes went wide, the pupils contracting in genuine shock. Her heavy jaw dropped open a fraction of an inch. She physically recoiled as if I had just struck her across the face. What did you just say to me? She hissed. I said no, I repeated. My voice was perfectly level. There was no emotion in it, just the cold, hard delivery of an order. I am not your personal bank. You bought the truck. You make the payments. Figure it out yourself. The heavy sliding glass door suddenly jerked open, hitting the metal stopper with a loud bang. My mother stepped into the kitchen. She held a greasy spatula in one hand. She had clearly been standing right outside the glass, listening to the entire shakedown. She did not look at Brenda with disappointment. She glared directly at me. Her face flushed a dark, angry red. You ungrateful little brat, my mother shrieked. Her high-pitched voice bounced painfully off the kitchen tiles. Where did you learn to be so damn selfish? Your brother and Brenda hold this family together. They stayed close to home to take care of us so you could run off and play officer. You owe this family. There it was, the ultimate weapon, the guilt trip. For my entire adult life, my mother had used that exact lie to keep me in line. She weaponized their poor life choices and packaged them as noble sacrifices. Ryan did not stay home to care for them. He stayed because he was a high school dropout who could not hold down a job at a hardware store. But in my mother's twisted reality, I was the one in debt. I was the one who owed them a cut of my hazard pay because I had the audacity to succeed. 10 years ago, that screaming accusation would have crushed me. It would have sent me running to my checkbook, desperate to buy back her approval. Today, it meant absolutely nothing. I did not break eye contact with my mother. I took one deliberate step forward, forcing both her and Brenda to step back against the granite counter. "I do not owe this house a single dime," I said. My voice was dangerously quiet. "I earned my uniform bleeding in the desert while Ryan was drinking on your couch. I am done subsidizing your bad decisions. Clean up your own financial garbage." My mother gasped, clutching the spatula to her chest like I had just stabbed her. Brenda's face twisted into an ugly mask of pure rage. She opened her mouth, a string of foul gutter insults ready to spew out. I did not stay to listen. I turned my back on them. I shoved the glass door open and stepped out onto the patio. The backyard was still thick with barbecue smoke and the low hum of country music. My father was laughing at something Ryan said. Jack caught my eye from across the lawn. He saw my face. He put his grilling tongs down immediately. I walked straight past the grill, down the side yard, and out to the front driveway. I leaned against the heavy iron gate, pulling the cool, salty ocean air deep into my lungs. Behind me, the muffled sounds of shouting erupted inside the kitchen. I heard my brother's heavy boots stomping across the hardwood floor. They were losing their minds. The ATM had just permanently swallowed their debit card. I reached into the front pocket of my jeans. I pulled out my phone. I opened my Chase banking app. The screen cast a pale blue glow on my face. My thumb hovered over the screen. I scrolled down to the scheduled transfers tab. There it was. The monthly automated deposit I'd been sending my parents for 5 years. The money they claimed they needed for groceries, which actually paid for Ryan's beer and Brenda's car notes. I tapped Manage. I tapped Cancel Series. A small dialog box popped up. "Are you sure you want to delete this recurring transfer?" I hit Confirm. The screen loaded for a split second, then refreshed. The list was completely empty. The heavy steel doors of my financial fortress slammed shut. The parasite was officially cut off from the host. I locked my phone and slid it back into my pocket. Jack walked around the side of the house, stopping next to me. He leaned against the iron gate. He did not ask what happened. He just looked at the massive Ford truck crushing our flower bed, then looked down at me. "They are not going to let this go," I whispered, staring at the thick rubber tires. "Brenda is an animal. She just lost her funding. She is going to try to destroy the wedding to get even." Jack crossed his arms over his chest. A slow, chilling smile touched the corners of his mouth. "I know," Jack said, looking up at the house. "And we are not going to fight her like some street trash. We are going to do this by the book." The heavy tires of the Ford F250 shrieked against the asphalt. My family tore out of our driveway, leaving thick black marks and a cloud of burnt rubber in their wake. They were gone, but the poison they left behind still hung in the air. I turned away from the iron gate. The adrenaline that had kept my spine rigid and my voice steady during the confrontation suddenly crashed. A bone-deep exhaustion settled into my joints. I walked back into the quiet house. My hands were shaking. I pressed them flat against the cool granite countertop to hide the tremor. Cutting off my own family hurt worse than any physical injury I had taken in the field. It was not a victory. It was an amputation. Jack walked up behind me. He wrapped his arms around my shoulders, his chest a solid grounding weight against my back. I leaned into him. I closed my eyes, listening to the steady rhythmic thump of his heart. "They are not going to just walk away," I whispered into the quiet kitchen. The reality of the situation was settling over me like a suffocating blanket. "Brenda is a rabid dog when it comes to money. We just cut off her oxygen supply. She is going to snap." I turned around to face him. "The wedding is in 2 weeks. She is going to show up. She will use it as a stage to publicly humiliate me and get revenge. She wants a scene." Jack's jaw set. The soft, comforting husband vanished instantly, replaced by the tactical officer. He looked out the window at the crushed marigolds in the front yard. "I know she will try," Jack said. His voice was low, devoid of any panic. "But we are not going to brawl with her in the dirt like street trash. We let her think she is the apex predator." Then, we dropped the hammer. Later that night, the house was completely silent. The only light in the living room came from a single brass reading lamp. It cast a sharp yellow pool of light across the dark oak coffee table. Jack walked out of his home office carrying a thick, heavy paperback book. He dropped it onto the table with a solid thud. It was not a self-help book. It was not a family counseling guide. It was the Manual for Courts Martial, the UCMJ, the Uniform Code of Military Justice, the absolute unbending law of the United States Armed Forces. I sat down on the leather sofa. My intelligence officer instincts kicked in. The fear and exhaustion burned away, replaced by cold, calculated focus. This was my territory. Jack sat beside me. He opened the manual. The dry rustling of the thin paper sounded incredibly loud in the quiet room. He flipped past the procedural sections, his index finger tracing down the dense text until he found a page marked with a red, sticky tab. Your enemy has a fatal flaw. Jack began, his tone purely academic. She is incredibly proud of being a staff sergeant, an E7. She uses that rank to bully civilians and junior enlisted. She thinks because she married your brother, the family hierarchy overrides the military hierarchy. He tapped his finger hard against the page. But legally, in the eyes of the Department of Defense, she is an enlisted Marine, and you are a commissioned officer. You outrank her. I looked down at the dense paragraphs. She does not care about rank in civilian clothes, Jack. She will not have a choice. Jack replied smoothly. He flipped the page to another red tab. Article 134, conduct prejudicial to good order and discipline, and more importantly, he pointed to a bolded section, Article 90. I leaned in. I read the text under his finger. My breath caught in my throat. Assaulting or willfully disobeying a superior commissioned officer. If she loses her temper, Jack said, his voice dropping into a lethal quiet register. If she lays a single finger on you in a public setting, especially at a wedding filled with active duty officers in dress uniform, it is no longer a domestic dispute. A sharp electric jolt of realization hit the back of my neck. I looked up at Jack. The trap was so simple and yet so devastating. We did not need to scream. We did not need to fight back. We just had to let her ego do the work. It becomes the assault of a superior officer, I murmured. Jack nodded slowly. The look in his gray eyes was terrifyingly cold. It was the look of a hunter who had just perfectly zeroed his rifle scope on a target. It is a felony, Jack stated. It means an immediate court-martial, a dishonorable discharge, loss of all pension benefits and rank. It is career suicide. He closed the heavy manual. The sound echoed in the quiet room. Sun Tzu wrote, "If your enemy is secure at all points, be prepared for him. If he is in superior strength, evade him. If your opponent is of choleric temper, seek to irritate him." Jack leaned back against the sofa. We do nothing. We do not uninvite her. We let her walk right into the venue. The invisible net was fully woven. It was strung tight, waiting in the dark. If she has an ounce of self-control, she gets to drink cheap champagne and go home, Jack said. But if her toxic ego blinds her, she will step right off the cliff, and we will not even have to lift a finger to push her. I looked at the closed manual on the table. The fear was completely gone. I was ready. Flash forward, 2 weeks later. The California sun was blinding. The string quartet was playing a soft classical melody. I was wearing a delicate white lace dress. And then the music stopped. "You will always be a pathetic freak, Molly," Brenda screamed. She lunged forward. Her fist swung through the air, aimed directly at my face. She took the bait. The sharp crack of the slap echoed across the lawn, silencing the string quartet mid-note. My head snapped to the side. The metallic, salty taste of blood instantly flooded my mouth. Time seemed to fracture, slowing down to a crawl. I felt the hot sting radiating across my cheek, but the physical pain registered as a dull hum in the background. The intelligence officer in my head took total control. I did not see a bully of a sister-in-law standing in front of me. I saw a target who had just willingly stepped on a landmine. The bait had been swallowed whole. Brenda stood there on the manicured grass, her chest heaving. She had her fists clenched at her sides, her eyes wild with a feral, toxic satisfaction. She was waiting for the meltdown. She wanted me to drop to my knees, crying, staining my white lace dress with blood, proving once and for all that she was the dominant force in the family. Instead, I locked my jaw, swallowed the blood, and stared at her with absolute freezing indifference. The crowd of guests was paralyzed. My mother was taking a hesitant step forward to comfort Brenda. My father was glaring at me, annoyed by the scene. Then Jack moved. He did not rush in like a frantic groom trying to break up a catfight. He did not raise his hands to push Brenda away. He closed the distance in 2 long, deliberate strides, his imposing frame in full dress blues, cutting through the crowd. He stepped squarely between us, turning his broad back to me, creating an impenetrable wall of navy blue wool and polished brass. He did not look at my parents. He locked his cold gray eyes onto Brenda. Staff Sergeant Brenda Cooper, attention to orders. Jack did not yell. He roared. The command ripped from his chest with a concussive force that vibrated in the dead silence of the garden. It was the absolute unyielding voice of a superior officer demanding immediate compliance. It hit Brenda like a physical blow. Her brain did not have time to process the situation. Her ego did not have time to argue. Decades of ingrained military conditioning bypassed her conscious thought entirely. Her body reacted on pure, raw instinct. Click. Her heels snapped together. Her arms slammed down to her sides, fingers curled and pinned to the seams of her pants. Her spine snapped rigid. Her chin tucked in. In less than a second, the arrogant, aggressive bully vanished, replaced by a terrified, enlisted Marine, locked at the position of attention. She stood there, frozen. I watched over Jack's shoulder as the realization of what she had just done slowly bled into Brenda's eyes. The feral satisfaction evaporated. Her face drained of all color, turning a sickly pale gray. Her breathing turned shallow and rapid. She was no longer facing a submissive sister-in-law at a family barbecue. She was staring straight into the eyes of a field-grade officer, and she had just committed a felony. My father suddenly snapped out of his shock. He saw Brenda rigid and pale, and his temper flared. He took a heavy step forward, his face turning red. "Hey, what the hell do you think you are doing, Jack?" My father shouted, pointing a thick, calloused finger at my husband's chest. "That is my daughter-in-law. You do not talk to her like that. We can settle this right now. Just calm down and—" "Stand down, sir," Jack interrupted. He did not even turn his head to look at my father. His eyes remained locked on Brenda like a laser sight. Jack reached to his shoulder and keyed the microphone attached to his earpiece. The radio crackled loudly in the quiet garden. "Command, this is Major Monroe. Timestamp 15:32 hours. I have an active situation. Staff Sergeant Brenda Cooper has just committed a public physical assault on a commissioned officer, Captain Molly Cooper. The threat is contained. Send PMO to my location immediately." The radio squawked a brief affirmative response. My father stopped dead in his tracks. His mouth hung open. The civilian authority he had wielded like a club for my entire life was entirely useless here. He was trying to argue family dynamics. Jack had just erected an impenetrable wall of federal law. My father looked around desperate, but there was nothing he could do. The rules of his house did not apply on this grass. Brenda began to shake. A fine, uncontrollable tremor traveled up her arms. She kept her eyes locked straight ahead, but I saw her pupils darting frantically from side to side. She was looking for an escape. She was looking for a friendly face. She found none. The garden was filled with our guests. Half of them were active-duty military. Captains, majors, and colonels stood around the perimeter of the lawn. They were not looking at Brenda with shock or pity. They were looking at her with absolute, unfiltered disgust. To them, she was not a tough woman standing up for her family. She was a disgrace to the uniform. She was a liability. She was garbage. The heavy, silent judgment of her peers crushed whatever was left of her ego. Jack took a half step closer to her. He leaned in just enough so only she could hear his next words. "You just assaulted a superior officer," Jack whispered. His voice was laced with pure venom. "You are done." The kingdom Brenda had spent 10 years building out of intimidation, cheap beer, and my stolen hazard pay collapsed into dust in exactly 10 seconds. She had weaponized her rank to terrorize me when I was a teenager. Now that same military machine was going to chew her up and spit her out. Far down the street, the faint rising wail of a military police siren cut through the afternoon air. A white military police cruiser tore across the manicured grass of the venue. The tires ripped deep, ugly gouges into the turf. Flashing red and blue strobe lights painted the terrified faces of the wedding guests. Two heavily armed MPs stepped out of the vehicle. They did not walk. They marched with the heavy, unyielding purpose of federal law enforcement. Brenda did not put up a fight. The bully was gone. She was just a coward in a cheap dress. They spun her around, kicked her legs apart, and snapped a pair of cold steel handcuffs violently around her wrists. The sharp metallic ratchet sound cut cleanly through the murmurs of the crowd. They shoved her into the back of the cruiser. My father broke through the crowd. His face was pale and slick with panicked sweat. He chased after the MP, waving his hands, begging for a minute to talk to the commanding officer. Ryan jogged right behind him, looking utterly lost, without his wife to hide behind. My mother clutched her purse, fast walking past me. She brushed right past my blood-stained dress. She did not stop. She did not ask if my jaw was broken. She did not even look at me. She was too busy chasing down a federal patrol car, desperate to save the criminal who had just assaulted her own daughter. I watched them pile into their rented sedan and speed out of the parking lot, following the police cruiser into the California dusk. That was the final confirmation. The ultimate, undeniable proof. Strangely, it did not hurt. The searing pain of rejection that had haunted me for 28 years simply vanished. The heavy toxic shell I'd been carrying cracked down the middle and fell away. I felt completely hollow. But it was a clean, quiet kind of empty. 2 hours later, the apartment was dead silent. The adrenaline crash was brutal. It hit me like a physical weight, pulling the strength straight out of my bones. I sat heavily on the edge of the living room sofa. I stared blankly at the dark TV screen. Jack walked out of the kitchen. He did not ask how I was feeling. He did not offer useless, empty platitudes about how things would get better. He just went to work. He sat down next to me. He gently turned my head. His large, rough fingers moved with surprising care as he unpinned the complex mess of my wedding hair. He pulled the bobby pins out one by one, dropping them onto the coffee table. Clink, clink, clink. He pressed a heavy ice pack against my swollen cheek. The shocking cold bit into my skin, numbing the dull, throbbing ache in my jaw. He handed me a steaming mug. Chamomile tea. I held the hot ceramic between my hands. I stared down into the pale yellow liquid. A single tear broke loose, sliding down my good cheek and dropping into the mug. "We won," I whispered. My voice was raspy and hollow. Jack shifted closer. He wrapped his hand over mine, completely engulfing it. "You are not crying for the family you had, Molly." Jack said, his voice a low, steady rumble in the quiet room. "You are mourning the family you actually deserved." He was right. I was not mourning my parents. I was mourning the 18-year-old girl sitting at a Thanksgiving table with a wine-soaked letter, waiting for someone to be proud of her. She was finally dead. 4 days passed. The swelling on my face turned into an ugly, dark purple bruise. It was 200. The world outside the duplex was completely still. I sat at the small kitchen table. A single overhead light bulb cast harsh shadows across the wood. I had a black ink pen and 4 sheets of blank-lined paper. I started writing. I did not write a polite email. I did not write a text message. I wrote a physical letter to my parents and my brother. I bled onto the page. I cataloged every single act of betrayal. I wrote about the Thanksgiving dinner. I wrote about the stolen hazard pay. I wrote about the fact that they ran after a handcuffed criminal instead of checking on their bleeding daughter. My hand cramped. The ink smeared. I pressed the pen down so hard the tip tore through the paper. Every word I wrote felt like dragging a piece of shrapnel out of my chest. When I finished the 4th page, I was breathing heavily. My chest felt incredibly light. The poison was out. It was all there, permanently documented in black and white. I gathered the 4 pages. I folded them perfectly in half, then in half again. A tight, rigid square. I stood up and walked over to the kitchen sink. I did not look for an envelope. I did not reach for a postage stamp. Sending it would only invite them to respond. It would give them an opening to gaslight me, to twist my words, to tell me I was being overly emotional. They did not deserve to read it. I dropped the folded square into the deep stainless steel basin. I reached into the junk drawer and pulled out Jack's silver Zippo lighter. I flipped the heavy metal lid open. The sharp clink echoed off the tiles. I struck the flint. A bright yellow flame flared up. I touched the fire to the corner of the paper. It caught instantly. The flame crawled across the blue lines, turning my anger, my trauma, and my parents' fake morality into curling black ash. I stood there watching the fire eat through the lies until there was nothing left but a small glowing pile of embers in the bottom of the sink. I reached forward and turned on the faucet. Cold water blasted out, hitting the hot steel with a loud hiss. The water caught the black ash, swirling it around the drain, sucking the last physical remnants of my toxic family down into the pipes. I turned the water off. The sink was spotless. The umbilical cord was officially cut. I walked back into the bedroom, crawled under the heavy blankets next to my husband, and closed my eyes. Tomorrow I was getting on a plane to Oregon. The military justice system does not care about family dynamics. It operates with the cold mechanical efficiency of a guillotine. Brenda's court-martial lasted less than 3 days. There was no dramatic civilian defense. The evidence was absolute. An E7 striking an O3 in front of 24 active duty witnesses. The judge advocate did not even blink. She was stripped of her rank. Staff Sergeant Brenda Cooper was reduced to an E1 private, then immediately handed a dishonorable discharge. They took her pension. They stripped her VA benefits. They threw her out of the Marine Corps with nothing but a permanent federal felony record. She was banned from ever stepping foot on a military installation again. Without her massive paycheck and my stolen hazard pay, their fake empire collapsed in weeks. A heavy diesel tow truck backed into their driveway at 2 a.m. The repo man hooked up that brand new lifted Ford F-250. The grinding gears and the flashing amber lights woke up the entire street. Ryan stood on the lawn in his bare feet, screaming at the driver, completely powerless as the truck dragged his inflated ego away into the dark. My parents drowned trying to save them. They drained their retirement savings to pay Brenda's civilian defense lawyers, desperate to protect the family image. The debt swallowed them whole. They called me over and over. They left frantic, crying voicemails begging for a bailout, demanding I drop the charges. I never heard a single word. I'd walked into a Verizon store the day after the wedding, handed over my old phone, and permanently changed my number. 6 months later, Oregon. We bought a small A-frame cabin hidden deep in a dense stand of Douglas firs, right on the edge of the rugged Pacific coast. The air up here was always sharp and cold. It smelled like wet pine needles, wood smoke, and salt. It smelled like breathing room. I was sitting at the kitchen island early one morning. The cast iron wood stove was crackling in the corner, throwing heat across the worn hardwood floor. I was holding a mug of black coffee, scrolling through a secure military server on my laptop. A new email popped up in my inbox. The sender was a Lance Corporal. I did not recognize the name. I clicked it open. Captain Cooper, it read. You do not know me. But I served under Brenda for 2 years. She was a monster. She made the junior female Marines' lives a living hell. She punished us for her mistakes. She threatened our careers if we ever spoke up. We thought she was untouchable. I stared at the glowing screen. The coffee in my mug stopped steaming. When you stood your ground at that wedding, you proved she was not bulletproof. You took her armor away. Because of what you did, me and 4 other girls finally found the courage to file formal IG complaints against her. We brought out the receipts. You fought for us without even knowing it. Thank you, ma'am. My chest tightened. A single hot tear spilled over my eyelashes and hit the keyboard. For 28 years, I thought my pain was just a useless, heavy burden. I thought I was just a convenient punching bag for broken people. But reading that email, the truth finally clicked into place. My scars were not just damage, they were a beacon. I took the hit so a squad of terrified 19-year-old kids did not have to take it anymore. The ghost from Quantico had finally become a blade. Exactly 1 year after the disaster in California, Jack and I walked down to the beach. It was 5:30, dawn. The Oregon coast was not sunny or peaceful. The sky was a bruised, heavy gray. Massive, violent waves crashed against the jagged black rocks, throwing freezing white spray high into the air. The wind whipped violently against our faces, stinging our cheeks with sea salt. It was perfect. There was no string quartet, no white lace dress to get stained with blood, no catering tents filled with people who secretly hated me. Just my faded Levi's, heavy scuffed leather boots, and a thick wool sweater. Jack walked beside me. He reached out and grabbed my hand. His grip was rough, calloused, and incredibly warm against the freezing ocean wind. He stopped walking and pulled me close to his chest. We stood right there on the wet-packed sand just inches from the freezing surf. We looked at each other. No toxic guests, no fake smiles, no obligations to people who only saw me as a bank account. We spoke our vows out loud into the roaring wind, just the two of us. A promise built on absolute respect, forged in the dirt and sealed in total freedom. I turned my head and looked out at the vast, unbroken horizon of the Pacific Ocean. I took a massive breath. The freezing air filled my lungs all the way to the bottom. I was not the little girl hiding under the Thanksgiving table anymore. I was not the victim shrinking into the shadows to make loud, arrogant people feel comfortable. I was Captain Molly Cooper. I had dragged myself through the mud, taken the worst hits my own blood could throw at me, and I had survived. The people who tried to break me were currently suffocating under the weight of their own pathetic arrogance. They made a lot of noise. They screamed, they threatened, and they flexed their fake power. But my silence had completely destroyed them. That is the real truth. The credit does not belong to the loudest person in the room. It belongs to the one standing in the arena, covered in dust and blood, who refuses to quit. I squeezed Jack's hand and turned my back on the ocean and walked home. Family is not always the people who share your blood. Sometimes it is the people who stand shoulder to shoulder with you when the storm hits hardest. If my story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. I want you to drop a comment below and tell me. Have you ever had to permanently cut off a toxic relative to save your own sanity? Type "I survived" in the comments if you walked away and share your experience. You are not alone in this fight.